Hello, welcome to the episode of the Let People Prosper series. My name is Dr. Vance, Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today we have someone who is another liberty warrior, someone who's fighting for freedom each and every day and making sure that free speech is on the minds of everyone so that way we can have more of it and free markets and everything else. And it's none other than Max Gulker. Max, welcome to the Let People Prosper show.
Hi, Vance. I just want to say you get terrific people on this show. I'm just honored to be here and take the time with you.
Well, Max, it's really a pleasure to have you on the program, and we've got a lot to talk about to make sure that people prosper when we're thinking about, big tech and all these other things that people are talking about right now. And for the audience, we're recording this on March 21st, 2023. So in case something else comes up before the time that we post this online, you'll know the date that we published this or that we recorded this. So let me first give the audience your background, and then we can jump right into it. So Max Gulker is an economist and writer and senior policy analyst at Reason Foundation, who studies how poverty and access to education can be addressed with voluntary, decentralized approaches that don't interfere with free markets. He is also interested and been writing a lot about this here recently, emerging fields like blockchain and cryptocurrencies, competitive issues raised by tech giants, and the sharing economy. Gulker holds a PhD in economics from Stanford University and a BA in economics from the University of Michigan. He has spent time in the private sector consulting with large technology and financial firms on antitrust and other litigation, and he was a senior research fellow with the American Institute for Economic Research. So, Max, it's really a pleasure to have you on the Let People Prosper show. Let's start off, though, like I do with all the guests, because we got a lot to jump into today. What motivates you to do what you do each and every day?
Progress. Is it valuable to others? Well, they can decide, but it's certainly what engages my curiosity.
Yeah, no, that's great, Max. I think that you laid that out well, and we've talked about that some on the program and on the show about what goes on in a lot of these graduate programs, which ends up being a lot of just almost applied math. And we lose a lot of the economics and the theory and in many of the programs that are out there. And it ends up being where you think of the economy more as a machine because it's just a math problem that you can maximize and, linear programming and things of that nature, where we lose sight of, to your point, that these are just humans. These humans that are exchanging and coming together. And I've learned a lot from those folks that you mentioned as well, including Ben Powell, but also, Thomas Sowell and Hayek and Kerzner as well. What do you think something about, like Kerzner, for example, is probably someone that most people haven't heard of, yet
Right.
He provides so much insights in his work. What are some of the things that you would highlight from the work of Kerzner
and now more than ever, in a way, with the kind of technological landscape. Now, I want to be careful here with all of those other people you've had on your show to say I am not an expert in Austrian economics and the history of Austrian thought. I am not going to give full pictures of who these people were and everything they did. I can tell you how their ideas and certain ideas inform me.
Sure.
And have really kind of reshuffled the deck of how I look at things a lot of the time. First of all, so Hayek kind of famously proposes his knowledge problem. And that, starts for me to form the basis of a whole different way to look at markets and why we need markets and why they're essential. It's not the Chapter 1, Econ 101, supply equals demand. That's dynamic and involves real knowledge and resembles something that's happening in the real world. I think that Econ 101 stuff is a useful shorthand to think about how markets work if you have the foundations. It's not a particularly good justification for markets because it has a lot of assumptions that can be knocked down. But, so Hayek sets a course with all of these issues about knowledge and local knowledge and lack thereof. He's relatively silent, although less so maybe in some of his later stuff, on how the competitors, the firms, we would say, get that knowledge, right? And if I could boil down sort of one of the key ideas of Kerzner into something way too simple, but that really informs, the way I think especially about tech and these issues today, it's that the firms have to do the competing to get the knowledge.
Yeah.
Right? That's how they, right? Kerzner would call it entrepreneurship, although he would put that on small levels and big levels, finding some cost savings versus stumbling upon some complete unknown, niche in a market or huge source of consumer demand that you've never seen before. And, Cursor takes some of the logic of Hayek and some of the other ideas from Mises and kind of combines them and lays out this very intuitive to me framework of, the market is a process. We are learning throughout that process. We're learning by doing the competing, by whether it's our preferences or our capabilities or sources of demand or sources of where we're valuable. There's radical uncertainty there. And we're constantly, in a process of learning. And, he adds entrepreneurs to that who, in some ways we can say are all of us, but we can also at a higher level look at people who are learning about new potentially useful areas that things can be offered in.
Yeah, that's right. And you laid that out really well. And I think one of the things that I learned a lot from Kersner and others too, but we've really got to think about the market as a process. Too often when you get into supply and demand charts, like you mentioned a minute ago, it was that we think about there's an equilibrium, and that through an equilibrium, there's this perfectly competitive marketplace. What Kersner and others have taught us is that, look, in that sort of system, there's actually not any competition. If you have pure competition or perfectly competitive marketplace where there's zero profit, what's the incentives, right, for there to be competition in the marketplace? And really, that's why it is dynamic, that you're never really at an equilibrium. You're moving to an equilibrium where you have a process where people are coming together, where these prices are signaling to us whether or not we should consume or produce. But there's not like one set point that's there. And that's always kind of tough to teach students, because they see the supply and demand, they want to get to that point, but that's really just a part of the overall process, right? And I want to jump into how you think about a monopoly. That's one side of the market, perfectly competitive, or the spectrum of markets, perfectly competitive market. The other side, there's a lot of talk about monopolies, and this gets us into our tech discussion that we wanted to have today. How do you define what a monopoly is, and are these quote unquote big tech companies, are they really a monopoly?
So let me answer that question by looking particularly at some of these open and hot antitrust questions in big tech, rather than just laying it out theoretically, which I'm never quite as good at doing.
Perfect.
But
that'll be great.
There was in the last several years, beginning with this paper in 2017 that Lina Khan, who's now the chair of the FTC, wrote, although was a law student then. The beginning of this kind of resurgence of excitement on the left in antitrust. And to capture their thinking, let me kind of tell you a little bit about what they think, how that's gone at the FTC a little bit, and then several of the criticisms from all around the field, including, some that from my background, I can kind of synthesize different ones into. So Lina Khan writes a paper called Amazon's Antitrust Paradox. And this is a takeoff of a book written in the 70s by Robert Bork called The Antitrust Paradox, which had been very influential, which had set the consumer welfare standard as the usually, by and large, kind of measuring stick to which basically says if consumers are worse off, if price is higher or quality is lower because two firms merge and they take over too much of the market, then that's something to be reviewed. If not, it's not. And people can debate how perfect of a standard that is. All I would say is that's a standard. It puts restraints on what kind of government can do to stop things. It forces them to really think about the mechanisms. And that in and of itself is, especially these days, a good thing. But in Amazon's Antitrust Paradox, Lina Khan says current antitrust policy is not sufficient to sort of catch the antitrust conduct of Amazon. And why is that? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons. Running theme, whole bunch of reasons with these, as I'll get to. She says, first of all, there's network effects. And network effects make you want to get big quickly, which in a sense they do. And that is going to lead towards incentives to do things like predatory pricing. And predatory pricing, if you think about, if I cornered the market in steel and then a new entrant came in, I could sell at a loss for a little while to outlast the new entrant that didn't have any capital or liquidity. and I'd be back and I could be a monopolist and jack up prices again. Something you were getting at that's worth mentioning is this movement on the left has started using monopoly simply to mean big company, whereas monopoly, whether you're doing, game theory or Kerzner type entrepreneurship analysis, has a very specific definition, just one firm.
Yeah, right. Because everything these days, because they're trying to say, well, but monopolies are leading to inflation. Everything else is the cause of inflation instead of, government.
Right, exactly. Right, monopolies are jacking up price. Yeah, that's been a tough one to watch and not blow one's top over. But
right.
So she alleges in the paper predatory pricing conduct in ebooks and diapers. Then she moves on to sort of the various vertical relationships between the parts of Amazon's companies. We're missing anti-competitive conduct here too. She talks about I had to make a list because their logistics services, their data services, their private label that competes with their Amazon marketplace, which maybe there's an incentive, maybe again is a running theme here, that they could use some of that bargaining power. And then she proposes remedies. But as a whole, you'll notice there's a lot of throwing things against the wall and seeing what sticks. She makes about 6 or 7 different allegations in the paper. And that's because this movement is really a movement about saying the consumer welfare standard was overly restrictive to authorities in deciding who should merge and not. Before that, we operated on structure type standards, what was the concentration in the market. Now, they never proposed anything specific, but so not in that paper, but later on, that this generates a good bit of excitement in certain circles, and for a few years it's just kind of written about a lot in the circles we run in, and then the people who disagree with us, and it slowly becomes known as the neo-Brandeis movement. A couple of criticisms about this. Let me talk about a couple of criticisms, and then we can talk about how things have gone at the FTC.
That sounds good.
And 2 things I would really recommend. I'll send you links to some of my stuff that's about this and some of the other stuff I mentioned here. So,
and I'll be sure to put those in the show notes page as well.
Yeah. So at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, real recently, Robert Atkinson and Michael Ward wrote a terrific paper, the best one I've seen, that really took that specific antitrust paper from Khan and refuted it point by point in terms of, and this is fairly mainstream, sort of the economics of two-sided markets, of platform, and in saying things like sometimes you lower prices on one side to attract people on the other side. When sides here are Amazon's buyers and sellers. They do a really good job of that. David Evans and Richard Schmalensee a couple of years ago, who are they weren't at Stanford, but those would have been like the professors I would have had. They are these sort of game theorists, econometrician, most likely to testify if these things go to big trial, kind of economists. And they had written something that was more critical in a general way of neo-Brandeis antitrust thinkers and their treatment of network effects in general, that network effects don't just mean one kind, and bigger is better, and there can be heterogeneity across these. So, those criticisms, I think, are really important. And those are the criticisms that most economists, I think, will respond to. I think another layer is added to it by the Kerzner type analysis that we're talking about. And that's that, what they're getting at, what Lina Khan is getting at in this paper is basically saying that network effects lead to bigness, right? And they lead to a lack of competition because then there's a high cost to enter and be as big as the other thing. However, if you take the criticisms about network effects, about two-sided markets, about indirect network effects, about the fact that these are all slightly different spaces, and also there's something called multi-homing. You can use multiple platforms at once. And then you look at a few other sort of relatively novel aspects of kind of the tech world we're in now relative to what we were before. Relatively low entry costs from the beginning, a steady stream of entrepreneurs and kind of tinkerers. And if you think about how all these big companies got founded and, the platforms they knocked off that people said never could get knocked off, oftentimes, it starts in somebody's garage or it starts with one idea and then it shifts to another. And in this kind of process with this constant churn, and especially because there are so many potential entrepreneurs out there in this space who are starting tinkering, they can learn through that process to, new places where there will be consumer demand, new things that consumers want. Zoom is an extremely good example of this. In the middle of COVID, why did we not start using Google or Facebook's conferencing app, right? Why was that not insurmountable? Well, Zoom found a way to do it better. Who started as relatively small entrepreneurs. So that almost flips things on its head. And so, in a way, I'm arguing that a lot of this, and that a lot of the world we live in now is sort of Kirchner on steroids, in a way, which is a funny way to look at it. But because of the low entry costs, because of the entrepreneurs that almost are coming into this because it's their hobby or because they like to, or it's very easy to pivot from one idea to another, a lot of these network effects are actually what keep these industries competitive in a way. And just the final little kind of corollary of that is that Khan and other kind of neo-Brandeisian intellectuals will say we need competition to discipline these firms. Well, the irony is competition made these firms, right? The competitive process, properly defined, made Amazon and made Facebook, and will continue to do things that we cannot possibly predict as we sit here today. And messing with that seems like a bad idea.
Yeah, definitely. Well laid out there, Max. And there's so many different parts to go into. But I think kind of taking a little bit of a step back with the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, Lina Khan, who's leading that now, the gold standard within the antitrust and thinking about monopolies and breaking them down over time now has really been that consumer welfare standard, which you laid out earlier. And other FTC commissioners have used that really as a standard. And I think even the Supreme Court has used that as well. And I hope that we're not moving away from that. But there has been a movement even from the quote unquote right to go after some of these companies. Part of it may have been because of the removal of maybe President Trump on Twitter or on other social media, but there's also been pushback because of elections. And I think there's a lot that's behind that, but there has been a kind of a push to say, you know what, the business are the ones that are causing a lot of the problems within society. They're the ones that are bad. It's almost like this NatCon, National Conservative sort of movement to think instead of the default being that government is the problem from a lot on the right, that's kind of the default that I usually have. There's this default now that, well, it may not just be the government. It could also be some of these businesses that are against the private markets, that are against capitalism. And some, I think, are even agreeing. Maybe some of the Josh Hawleys of the world, Senator Josh Hawley, are saying, look, Lina Khan is heading in the right direction. What are some of your thoughts about that?
So let me talk a little bit about how things have gone in the first year or so of Lina Khan's chairmanship of the FTC.
Great.
And then I can tie that into a little bit of what you said about the right and some political criticisms that arise from this approach to antitrust that we're criticizing here too, in addition to the economic criticisms that we've already laid out. So Lina Khan becomes chair of the FTC about a year ago. This is a clear signal by the Biden administration that they intend to go after big tech firms more, go after mergers and acquisitions more. You know, she is considered the thought leader of this sort of movement. Now, early on, she makes a speech where she says, well, I definitely don't think the FTC should have a 100% winning record in court. And if you stop and think about that, that's a sentiment that usually you might expect to hear from a defense attorney. Like, you know, you're kind of entitled to like all the defense that you want.
Yeah.
From an attorney bringing civil suits and enforcement actions against companies, that's saying that she wants to push the envelope. And that's a lot of what this new Brandeis movement boils down to. I gave you the one example with Amazon, but this gets extended in lots of other writing. The idea is really companies shouldn't merge as much and companies shouldn't be as big. And that's not just because it's a harm to consumers. It can be a harm to labor. They can be monopsony purchasers of labor. We've seen that argued. It's, again, a laundry list. The vertical tie-ins and big data we just talked about, they will say, well, if this company's too big, it can influence political outcomes by its donations, probably in directions not in favor of the people who are worried about that. So Khan had said that, and then the FTC brought a suit trying to block a merger late this year by Meta against a virtual reality fitness Meta's purchase of a virtual reality fitness app called Within that was one of the first high-profile kind of rubber meets the road examples of how this was going to work. And even I was surprised at how little was there when I looked at it. Basically, the allegation was Meta, formerly Facebook, which has started exploring, the nascent virtual reality market, the hypothetical virtual reality market that doesn't really, only the beginnings of exist yet. They want to purchase a small entrepreneurial firm that has made a virtual reality fitness app called Within. This doesn't seem unusual. This seems certainly to correspond to kind of Meta's strategic outlook. It is the kind of thing that's often considered a victory by small entrepreneurs. The FTC says no. There's harm to future competition here. There's potential harm to future competition, and that's because Meta could have made an app in-house too, which I believe in opposing filings, the Meta's legal team called that market a litigation fiction as of now, and mentioned like the 5 or 6 other firms that were out there. It was very, I don't even want to say it was a weak case in terms of their ability to bring a case. It was like it almost didn't matter. It was almost like bringing the case. And I think, and there's certainly, I was sharing an article with you yesterday, I think, from NPR that was not necessarily casting this as a bad thing, but basically saying this is what they were doing. They want to have a chilling effect on mergers overall. If you're especially a tech company, but a big company that's thinking about buying something or moving into some space, they want you to take into account the probability they're going to take you to court, and it's going to take 3 years and tens of millions of dollars of lawyers and people like who I used to work with to hash the entire thing out. And that's both was the selling point originally, but now is the problem with all of this is it's less a legal assertion and more a policy point about just pushing back against big firms. And it never really, they will say certain things about different standards they would like to see change, but they never get that specific. And that's because they really want sort of discretionary power to reduce this or to keep larger firms in check who they think have a, nefarious outlook. It really is a matter of Lina Khan and her allies saying, we don't want Facebook getting any bigger. Here's an example of Facebook getting bigger. Let's throw everything at it. Let's not be afraid to lose. Let's throw everything at it we see. I said something in the first piece I wrote about this when I was just kind of flabbergasted that, like, bringing a lot of cases you don't think you're going to win at a big cost to taxpayers, large firms, and entrepreneurs does not seem like a good organizing principle around which any administration would base their competition policy. That's largely been borne out so far in terms of the rubber meeting the road. For years when I would look at this and I would think back to my time kind of working on some of these cases and consulting, I would say, don't courts like standards? Right? Like, don't they like really specific? Like, where is that here? And sure enough, that Within case was thrown out so quickly that I think probably worked in the reverse way towards Khan and her team, in that it wasn't a long protracted suit. Their attempt to sort of throw wrenches in it was didn't really amount to very much. About 6 weeks after the judge announced that, something even more unprecedented happened, which was the sole remaining Republican on the Federal Trade Commission, which is this, 5 people. They're appointed by presidents in sitting terms. One Republican had already resigned. The second one does so, Christine Wilson, and she does so in a Wall Street Journal op-ed. She says at the end of it, when I used to advise my clients about not colluding when they would be at trade association meetings, I would say, if people start talking about price, make a loud exit, get up, spill a drink, and walk out of the room and make sure everybody sees you. And she says, consider this my loud exit. And it's not about the big firms are bad thing, which, the FTC is supposed to have dissent. It's supposed to have people from both parties, commissioners from both parties on it. It was about the amount of power she was concentrating in the office and the amount of basically discretionary power in herself and her allies. And for time's sake, I will not get into the various allegations of that, which haven't been fully played out yet. I would say overall, that has not been a terrific first year for either Chairwoman Khan or for this kind of antitrust movement that was just getting off the ground. In terms of the right, I started just in the last day looking at the things Josh Hawley has said about the FTC, and it is, I don't think he would say he agrees with Lina Khan about anything, or Elizabeth Warren, who is, has been one of the biggest supporters, lost one of my headphones there, of this breakup big tech movement. But he wants more power concentrated in the FTC. He wants it in a single person. These are mostly proposals from about 2 years ago, but still, he also has documents on his website that basically make the same antitrust allegations. I had thought before that mostly he had focused just on Section 230 and, they're censoring us and they're, no, but it really is an anti-big tech stance. And it's just amazing because, Elizabeth Warren wants big tech to do what she wants them to do. Josh Hawley wants them to do what he wants them to do. Those are very different things, but they both think that giving the FTC more power, more discretionary power, is a good thing, as though, and this is sort of the magical thinking of it, 50% of elections don't go to the party they don't like, right?
Right. Right.
As though that's gonna stop it. And so it really is, we've seen a lot of opposition to big tech on both the left and the right that amount to, whether it's competition, whether it's censoring or not censoring, whether it's algorithms, that all boils down to, we want them to do what we would like them to do, which then gets defined as democracy, whatever side it was. And just to circle back around to Kurtzner on steroids and whatnot, this is a world of radical uncertainty, right? We're going through this innovative process to learn how to use these very fundamental technological advancements that probably, my guess looking back, going to be seen as very fundamental. And so getting that wrong and not sort of understanding the dynamics and the learning behind that is a recipe for disaster, no matter who is misunderstanding it, really.
Yeah, well said, Max. I think that you really laid that out well in so many different areas. It also is kind of troubling to me that people would want bureaucrats to be more a part of this process. Whenever bureaucrats, regulation, red tape, that stifle the innovation, the new technologies, the churn that you talked about, mergers and acquisition that happen in the marketplace that allows us to come up with new things. It's one of the reasons why, the tech space and new technologies have helped to bring down prices. When you look at Mark Perry's chart of the century, the things that have went down over time have usually been those that have had the most churn, that have had the most technology innovations that can take place. And we're really stifling a lot of that. And I think from whether it be the left or from the right, ends up being more about politics and not really understanding the consumer welfare standard, not really understanding that innovation is where this stuff takes place, and how bureaucrats are going to end up leading a lot of the way, like at the FTC, instead of allowing the marketplace and the entrepreneurs, talk about Kersner and everything else, where that really should be where the innovation takes place. It's going to set us for the path for the future. And thinking about the future, kind of the last couple minutes we have here, Max, and this has been such good information information. So thank you. What do you think that about the future that could provide the most opportunity to let people prosper kind of in this space, or maybe something else that you're working on?
So let me try to link a couple of things to do that. I do think that we're in the middle of a technological revolution right now. I think probably looking back and predicting what the heck history is going to say is I'm having fun here. I'm speculating, but this is probably going to be seen on par with the Industrial Revolution. I think the information revolution or whatever. And when you see the decentralizing impact that has, just the fact that we're sitting here talking today, just the fact that of how easy it is to start a very small business where you're selling things if there's not regulation online, just all of the bottom-up capability there. I think that this in many ways is the ticket out of big top-down government that still allows for a society that maybe does some of the things that the better intentioned top-down folks wanted to do, whether it's policy, whether it's institutions. I think another, we worry about what's social media doing to the world and and I always think about Hayek with social media. And I think if he could see this, if I could go grab him in a Bill and Ted time machine and put him down in front of this for a week, again, you've talked to people who would know better than me, but it seems to me like all of these little battles we're having are exchanges of information, and that ultimately, maybe it's really long term, our knowledge and our understanding of how to organize ourselves is going to turn out so much better for that. So that's a big part of why I'm interested in technology and kind of how it relates to all this.
Yeah, that's great, Max. And I think I agree with you. I think that there's a lot that we're learning, and learning is knowledge, and more knowledge is going to help us for the future, for more prosperity, for overcoming obstacles, and hopefully more freedom and liberty, right? The things that we like and we understand support so much of the growth and prosperity across, not only here in the U.S., but across the world. So I just want to say thank you, Max, for all the work that you do. God bless you and your family, and continue to do great things in your future.
You too, Vance. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And for the audience, thank you all for listening. Now, it's been a little bit longer discussion here today, but it's one that's really needed, and one that I think we need to have more discussions. I may have Max back on. But if you would, please give us a 5-star rating. And until next time, let people prosper.